Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Jerry Thompson, joined as always by Brian Gottlieb, and I hope this is going to be a good show, man. I'm in like kind of a bad mood. I'm kind of sleepy. They just banned Book of Exalted Deeds, just everything.
That's what's weighing on you right now, the banning of Book of Exalted Deeds. Not even an actual standard in Magic 2022 standard, which you were playing a lot of, right? You enjoyed that format?
A decent amount. I played it. I wouldn't say I enjoyed it.
Okay. Well, there we go.
So similarly to standard, when, there's only so many playable cards per set, right? And then when you just ban like 10% of them, the standard format really starts to feel like it's lacking something, right? You're just like scraping by to find playables that you're actually happy to put in your decks. And it doesn't seem like, the decks that you're building are very well supported, which is probably true because they were using a bunch of the power points that they could distribute in the set on the things that ended up getting banned. So it's like, yeah, you're playing a deck that wasn't supposed to be viable, and it just all ends up feeling kind of mopey. And I feel like that's basically what 22 is.
Did you feel good getting out from like the Shadow of Eldraine though, and not having to deal with Innkeeper or, any of the other oppressive stuff that has existed throughout this time, ultimatums or rogues, anything like that?
Yes and no, because while playing against those cards stinks and, trying to be good against those cards when fundamentally you just can't really.
Yeah.
There are some other issues where, you just get sick of things like Goldspan Dragon, Asika's Chariot, whatever. Alrund's Epiphany is still there. And there just aren't a lot of really good ways to fight those things. Normally it's like, well, I'll play this like really hard control deck or this like really fast aggro deck or whatever. Instead, those things don't really exist. So the format's kind of like mid-range soup. And if that's the case, well, things like Goldspan Dragon, they're going to rise to the top, right? Because it's like kind of the best mid-range thing to be doing. So, you replace Edgewall Innkeeper with this dragon or whatever, and it kind of feels the same. It's like, okay, I'm not losing to technically the same stuff as I was before, but I kind of am.
Losing to the same idea, which in some ways maybe even more painful. I personally didn't play 2022. I don't know, man. Like I felt like I had too much to learn about real standard to really invest time in.
To what end?
My feet wet there.
What end?
To make this show, number one, to write my articles, number two, and to prepare myself for the return of organized play, which is no, not that. I don't know. I mean, why do we do any of this? That's the question I have to ask myself every single time. And the answer I have for you, Gerald, is joy. That's why I do all this. And I have felt a lot of joy playing actual standard and winning a bunch, and doing so while refusing to just head down the trail of any of the default decks, which usually monopolize all the winning in standard, things like Edgewall Innkeeper decks. Although I've played a little bit of Edgewall Innkeeper with my own flavor. No real Goldspan Dragoning. Again, a small amount, but more focused on other stuff. Just playing new cards and having success and enjoying these new decks, actually.
Yeah, I guess thinking about it and looking at your deck list, a lot of your decks could probably be improved by adding Goldspan Dragon.
Yeah.
Just going to throw that out there. And I have felt joy. I have felt joy recently. It's usually when, like thinking about modern, which kind of just means that we might be on the darkest timeline.
Different timeline for sure. I mean, that's not where I thought things were going to go, especially given Modern Horizons to, I don't know if rocky is the right word. Just there were some very clear outliers, and still are some clear outliers, but format's gotten itself into a good place despite those things. So.
Well, yeah, I would kind of contest that as well, but yeah, it's just like I used to be a big modern naysayer, right? And now we've gotten to the point where it's like that's my favorite format, I guess. And it's like, what happened? Because it's not like the format's great.
Just by default, it's winning.
Yeah, kind of.
That's not great.
But hey, that was a solid like 5 weeks of where, I was thinking about modern a lot, playing a bunch, got to make content on it. It was great. I hope that people are still interested in it so that I can continue to make content on it. But then again, I don't know if they're interested in it to begin with. So who knows?
Right. No, that's a fair question. And I don't know what the standard interest is like. I mean, like I said, my focus was on standard because I was assuming, well, I can't go write articles about 2022. And then I think a bunch of people are writing about it this week over on Star City. So maybe that's actually where the attention lies. And I saw Brad Nelson did like a poll asking people what they were playing. And the overwhelming answer was just nothing. But there was definitely more support for standard 2022 than traditional standard in his poll. It was like 22% 2022, 14% regular standard, 60% not playing. But yeah, at least it's the leader in the clubhouse.
Those polls are always
self-selecting.
Yeah.
I know. Yes, there's problems with Twitter polls for sure.
And,
it's interesting though. Like the thing I took away from it was, I would assume the vast majority, if not all of the people who follow Brad are there because they are fans of his for the most part, or they want information from him. They are Magic diehards for the most part. And 61% of them, I don't know if that's the exact number, but a large percentage of them are just like not playing, don't care. And this is a couple days after the new set came out. So
yeah, but I don't think that that's entirely reflective, right? I think a lot of people would check that box to be edgy or whatever, to be funny,
sure,
or to show their disdain. It's like, yes, I did play 20 matches today, but I'm going to say that I'm not playing because I'm not enjoying myself or whatever, right? So it's like, if you could get an actual truthful response from people, that would be different. I would be interested in seeing those results for sure.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I responded truthfully and said I have been playing standard, which is 100% accurate.
Yeah, so around maybe just like the weekend, but like Monday certainly, when I was trying to hammer out what my article topic was going to be this week, I noticed that the winds were kind of shifting and a lot of people were tweeting about 22, and most of the people who would normally stream standard were streaming it and stuff like that, and just seemed like there was far more interest there. So then I asked Cedric what he would be more interested in, if it was like normal standard or 22 or modern or whatever. And I think he had kind of the same response that you did, where it's like, oh, this 22 thing is fake, right? Like no one cares. And it's like, no, actually they do care a lot, from what I could tell.
Yeah, just another reflection of the ways Magic is changing, I think. And, a digital only format, if that's going to become the hot topic of interest, it's on us to adjust to that. And it's also on Wizards to manage that metagame appropriately. And I guess that means banning the Book of Exalted Deeds.
Good.
We hardly knew ye.
Yeah, whatever. Who cares?
I don't care. I said in my article, I wrote about Book in regular standard because I thought it was pretty interesting, pretty good. And I think the first line of my description of the deck was, regardless of how good this is, this should have never been printed into standard, because it's not a good thing to have exist.
Yeah. So point number one is that you ban a card in any format, you should give people wild cards for it.
Agree.
Point number two is you make a thing that says an angel gets Platinum Angel ability. You just did a Changeling set. I would probably do a pass for that.
I would check that, yes. Also, it's the most important card in the format, and think you should have had pretty high expectations for it being 4/3, based on the key mana mechanic in the format. So yeah, a check would be nice for sure.
Yeah, so a little bit of an oopsie there, but they fixed it real quick. They didn't fix it in the best way, but I'm glad that it's not in the format, or at least won't be by the time this comes out. So
do you think they should have taken it out in regular standard as well?
Probably not, because I think the decks are a lot better there. Like, you're doing a much better job of actually putting pressure on them, and potentially even having like removal open for when they try and go for that combo. There's a bigger card pool, so if you want to answer it, you can. Like, it seems like maybe a fine wrinkle to have in the format. as far as like, oh, I assemble this like 2-card kind of awkward combo and maybe win the game. I think that that's fine. The way it plays out after that is pretty heinous regardless.
Mm-hmm.
So, probably should not exist. But as far as like it existing in standard and being fine, it is probably fine. But
there's also the difference between a best of 1 format and a best of 3 format. I mean, I think that's night and day.
Yep, absolutely. So I think that that sort of gameplay should not really be encouraged in any format. But as far as it being in standard, it's like the format can adapt to it. It's not that big of a deal. But if you have to sit through those games where your opponent assembles this combo and then the game goes on for 40 more minutes, that sucks. That should not be a feature.
Yeah, not great. And after playing a few of those games with a mono white Book of Exalted Deeds deck that I was pretty high on, I thought it was very good. I was just like, I've had enough of this, and I don't want to do this to people anymore. I don't want to participate in this. I don't care if this is good or not. Let's go ahead and back this up.
Yep. Okay, standard itself. Have you found yourself like actually wanting to play some of these new cards rather than the old stuff based on maybe not power level, but just like potential viability, I suppose?
Yes, some absolutely. I mean, certainly a lot of the process during these first few weeks is just like try out everything, see what sticks. But there are cards that I am discovering where I'm just like, yeah, this is there on rate, on impact, not in the future. Right now, it's there. It's good enough. And I don't know if, some of the focus on Standard 22 is keeping other people from discovering that, or if people are just burnt out at this point and just like, I don't even care. I'm just waiting for Edgewall Innkeeper and friends to leave, and then I'll come back and check it out. But I've been impressed with how well some of these new cards hold up.
Well, people are just allergic to Rakdos in general, I think. So,
well, that's the card I've been most impressed with. And a lot of times, if I were to propose, so over on Star City, we do our top 5 lists where all of the content creators get together. We all throw out our own top 5.
Not all.
Not all. You didn't participate in this standard one.
Pass.
Could have used some backup there. But anyway, the story is we put out our picks and there's an aggregate list, and that's what's put together. And, with the exception of Strixhaven, where I was just like, these cards are all nonsense. I don't even know if they're going to get played. So it's fine if nobody else has this. But in this case, where there are some very good cards, you expect to see some backup for what you have as your number 1 card. And I was the only person out of 7 people, not only the only person who put Orcus number 1 on his list, the only person who had it anywhere on his top 5 cards. And usually I'd be like, oh, did I mess this up? Like, I feel like I misevaluated this card. But at this point, the set had been out for a few days and I had cast this card. It's really, really good. And I was just like, well, maybe nobody else has actually cast this card because I don't understand why it's not getting more press right now.
Yeah, the good news for you is that I've also played a decent amount of standard, and a lot of opponents have been pretty happy to cast this against me, and it's been good.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're getting it from the other side as well. Anything in terms of your deck building where you've tried to build around Orcus thus far?
Dude, I don't know what to do. It's like you can put it in like a pretty normal shell where it's like, yeah, sometimes I sweep the board, sometimes I get a little bit of value and just try and go from there. And I think that's a fine approach, but that kind of shell doesn't seem particularly good. Like Rakdos has had issues in the past, certainly with dealing with Sultai for sure, but also Adventures on Occasion. And that led me down the path of like, well, let's see if we can do like some busted stuff with the treasures and making a bunch of mana and casting this card and trying to get like a pretty big battlefield advantage on like turn 6 or 7 or something. And with all the treasure stuff, man, like there's an engine there. I just don't know what the optimal way to go about it is. And I'm working on so many different decks like in that vein. I'm not sure that like Orcus is even the best thing to be doing once you have access to all that stuff. But I mean, regardless, like you want to play it in like more of a fair shell or just like get some Kalanes and Shambling Gas back and stuff like that. Like that's good too. But I just don't know which version is actually best,
No, I'm with you. I have really enjoyed the treasure stuff alongside Orcus. We talked a bit last week's show about how I was going about doing that. I think that deck's still fine. But where I have kind of been exploring this week is sort of a more traditional shell, I guess, but I'm just playing it in adventures, and it has been so powerful there because you just don't lose that Edgewall Innkeeper war anymore, regardless of what side you're on. Like if you're trying to control opposing Edgewall Innkeepers or you're just trying to keep yours on the battlefield, you will do it. Orcus will let you do those things very consistently. One of the things about opening up to Jund is you also get access to things like Order of Midnight. So you're just able to play these really long controlling games on the back of Orcus. But because you are Jund, you can't do like Naya Adventures things where you're banking on, say, Elite Spellbinder or Drannith Magistrate to disrupt your opponent if sufficiently to keep them off of things like Emergent Ultimatum. So you now have to tap into some aggression. And Jund still does that really well. If you think back to how these decks first looked when they showed up, they would be like Questing Beast, Embercleave decks with Rimrock Knight. And you can still do all that. You can be like the essential Gruul shell and just splashing for Orcus. And then I think you get access to that beatdown plan, which is fast enough to beat these decks in a lot of spots. You have access to the attrition thing where your Edgewall Innkeeper just draws a billion cards throughout the entire game. And then you can also do control stuff. And all of these are supplemented so well by Orcus because, like I said, you can cast it for 4 mana, have a 5/3 flyer that tramples, and that's really good in a bunch of spots, especially in combination with things like Embercleave as turn goes on. So this Jund setup has been phenomenal for me. I think like if it was a extremely heavy Sultai metagame, this is not the best adventures deck to play against Sultai specifically.
Counterspell is probably better.
Counterspells are better, but the fact that you are so well positioned against other adventure decks that are targeting Sultai means you find yourself a really good like slice of the metagame, and you have a acceptable Sultai matchup. If not, like I think you can play it to a coin flip if you're willing to sideboard enough cards, which that's fine. Like that's a great place to be in if you have this massive edge in all these other matchups, and I think you do right now when you're leaning on Orcus.
Yeah, no, that all tracks with me. My experience has mostly been the same. I do like the Jund deck. I think that there are some changes you could make, of course, but you know it's early.
Right.
We'll figure this stuff out.
We can figure all of that out. I think the idea is identify the shell at this point and know exactly what you're doing. And this deck just kind of sings to me. It feels like it's doing all the stuff you want to do in the metagame. That's what's so cool about it, is it lines up very well with the existing metagame. Whereas like the treasure stuff is trying to sort of carve out its own niche and maybe is more something for the future. This feels like a deck for right now.
Yeah, and Edgewall Innkeeper Bone Crusher Giant is always going to be a fine thing to fall back on, right?
Good baseline, yep.
Yeah, so you start there, and then you adjust as necessary. And now it's like, well, we have a bunch of Triomes and Pathways and Fable Passages, and a lot of the versions are playing Jasper's Sentinel and some other different mana fixers and stuff like that. It's like you can play whatever like 3 or even 4 color combination you want to if you feel like that is going to get you the edge that you need.
Yeah, that is my next step. Is like, okay, I stretched out to 3 colors. I was very happy with it. And I guess it's not really a stretch, you know, where Naya Adventures is one of the top decks. But now I'm like, well, what if we go 4? Because it's not that hard to make that stretch. And
it's not. But
I think you can cover any weaknesses you find at that point. But I just don't think the weaknesses are that severe with this deck, which is why I haven't gone down that road yet.
Yeah, I guess this just popped into my head is like one of the Naya deck started splashing counterspells last season for kind of the same thing where it's like, yeah, we have Spellbinder and we have Roiling Vortex and these things that are like kind of disruptive and maybe get us to a coin flip or whatever. But like once you add, you know, some disputes or disdainful strokes, whatever to the mix, then you start seeing like really good returns, at least in the Sultai matchup. And they kind of did that seamlessly, you know? So like you could do the same thing here, but it's just like, I don't know, at that point, should you not just be playing Teamer or whatever? Like, are you getting that much from Orcus? Do you actually need Orcus?
It's a good question. And I don't know the answer to it because I haven't experimented with that yet. But my instinct is like, take the edge in these adventure, quote unquote, mirrors that Orcus gives you. And I think that's a really good place to be for this moment in the metagame.
Yeah. So where did you end up with Rakdos itself? More so interested in like overall game plan versus specific deck choices.
Yeah, so I've gotten away from like the graveyardy Croxa, Timer It Calls the Dead stuff, and just really pushed hard on that treasure package because it has paid me well enough where I'm willing for that to be my focal point. I think the I would say the Croxa approach is a little bit more mid range ish because it doesn't do the fireball type endgames as well. And I think that's important if you're going to keep pace with things like the Emergent Ultimatum decks. So hard treasures is my focus right now for the Rakdos deck. You can do things like sideboard in a very graveyard focused package, which I've been very happy with. You can do like Ebon Death and Skyclave Shades against things like Rogues, which I think is a fine B plan. It's also good against any kind of longer control deck, should that exist. I mean, obviously, it's mostly Sultai that you have to worry about at this moment. But if something pops up, and there has been some Dimir actually floating around that I've seen, I'm going to talk about a control deck that I really like later on in this episode. So there are options to do more traditional control, and I think the Rakdos decks can do a good job just playing a longer grindy game against them as well.
Well, on the other side of the treasure front, I stumbled into kind of a weird combination of cards, and then you reminded me that we had actually worked on the shell previously. This is like Jasper Sentinel, Magda, Kinnan.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have Prosperous Innkeeper and, whatever, some other treasure makers if you want them. And I've had some just like truly absurd like turn 2 and turn 3s. And I'm still working to try and figure out like, yeah, you can jam Goldspan Dragon on turn 3 and be very far ahead. But then if you just kind of like run out of gas, what do you do after that? So I'm like trying to fix that issue and haven't really figured it out. And one of the reasons I brought the 4-color thing was because one of the things that I started doing was just playing Showdown of the Scalds. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's comically easy with all the treasures, right? You just get to, if you have one card like that, you can very easily just put it in your deck. And maybe
I believe that.
Maybe just change like your basics to pathways if you want, right?
Yeah, I think Innkeeper in particular does a tremendous job of opening up those lanes, and that's the difference maker here, right? That's the card we were missing. That is the perfect glue to transition from that early game to the late game.
Yeah, it's also pretty nice where it just kind of like keeps you alive, right? So you're kind of messing around in the early turns against something like mono red aggro where you would just be like getting beaten down, falling behind, and now you're just up like 3 or 4 life, which maybe gives you an extra turn to get to Alrund's Epiphany or something like that to be able to close the game. So it has been pretty nice.
So I know you're doing like the treasure thing. You're getting paid on your Kinnans, so I understand why you want multiple treasures in your deck. But have you experimented with maybe fewer Goldspan Dragons and more Imrith in that spot? I mean, it seems like exactly the type of deck where you're dumping a lot of your hand onto the battlefield, have the potential to just vomit your entire hand. You're playing Imrith ahead of schedule, which makes it virtually unkillable due to its Ward 4 until you have, an attack step lined up. And then if you hit and you're low on cards, picking up 3 should be game breaking.
I considered cutting you off, but I decided to just let you finish. I currently have 4 and 2 in my deck.
Okay, there you go. You're ahead of me.
Yeah, because everything that you said just tracks, right? It's like you empty your hand very quickly, and this thing is like both a good blocker and a huge threat that then refuels you. So I was like, maybe this is it. But then I got to a point where I was like, well, maybe Showdown is better than this, so that you don't have as much concentration at the 5 mana slot. And I don't know, Showdown is still very awkward when you have like 5 drops in your deck and Alrund's Epiphany and stuff like that. So I don't know if it's the best answer. I feel like if Showdown is good, you probably have to find something else worth doing that doesn't involve 5 mana cards. But
sure.
Goldspan is like part of the engine, though. Like, I don't think that you can cut it because it makes treasures. It makes the treasures add an extra mana. And like, that's kind of what allows you to just have like these, 14 mana turns or whatever.
Yeah, it feels like you are, I won't say missing, because like obviously your deck can do very, very powerful things, but something modal like Hydroid Crisis is really the missing piece. Something that just scales ridiculously throughout the game, but is also valid in the early game.
Would be perfect. I currently have 2 Lair of the Hydra.
Yeah, that's a good mana sink for sure.
I have Shatter Skull Smashing, which should not be surprising, and is also, not the best way to sink a bunch of mana in, right? Because you're either doing it for like X is 2 to kill some small things, or you're doing it for 6 and then that just kills everything, right? So you don't need 20 mana to make that card good. But like Kinnan has been a fine payoff, especially once you add more dragons. But mostly I was looking for like a good 3 or 4 mana card to kind of like bridge, and I was playing some expressive iterations. I think we all know how good that card is at this point, but little awkward on the mana when you're trying to play like turn 1 Jasper Sentinel off a land that only taps for green,
Sure.
You can only iteration on like turn 4 at that point.
It feels like there should be a kicker card out there that is just like exactly what we're looking for, but nothing is springing to mind very quickly.
Yeah, maybe. I have a couple Prismari commands too, but...
Okay. Yeah.
It's not been ideal, for sure.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting puzzle to solve. I'm thinking of like, there's lame stuff like multiple choice, and I don't think that actually gets you anywhere. And
nah,
I don't know. This will be an interesting thing to track as the format evolves. I've felt a few times now this pinch where I just want modal things. I want to be able to scale my mana appropriately into the late game where I'm doing these treasure engines. Again, one of the reasons I love Orcus so much is that it does that trick. But there should be more stuff out there for us to use.
So I'm searching for Planeswalker. I just typed Planeswalker into the text bar.
Yeah, there's like Kicker Jace.
And normally it would just like, it would show you all the Planeswalkers, but now all the cards deal damage to Planeswalkers. So it's like not even being very helpful.
That's funny. There's also the big blue Planeswalker. What's that thing called? I want to call it Mordekaiser, but that's from Teamfight Tactics. It's definitely not Mordekaiser.
I think it's Mordekainen. I don't know.
That may be correct. That's seen some play in the Dimir decks I mentioned before. I think that's mostly because they're playing things like Blood on the Snow. So they're looking for these big bodies to bring back.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that.
I mean, I don't know if that's something your deck could potentially be interested in, or if you just have enough upside already that you don't really need to look for more threats, more... I mean, I don't even know how to really classify that card. It's a strange card for sure.
Yo, you know a card would be awesome in this deck?
What card?
I just found this card called Omnath, Locust of Creation.
Yeah, I bet that would be decent. Maybe an Oko. I mean, that's probably a good card in this deck, right?
It's probably good. I wasn't like, oh man, Oko solves all my problems. I definitely saw that card too.
Right. Yeah, funny all these cards that are out there. What if you had Once Upon a Time and you could just, fix your early turns a little bit?
That would be helpful too. That'd be really nice.
A lot of good cards out there.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm supposed to just be doing like Great Henge, Vivian type of stuff, but
it's this weird thing where you want to do your due diligence of these new end games. Like, we know those end games. We know you can Great Henge in a bunch of spots. We know what Vivian can do. You want to know if there's other ways to reach these points where you're able to outscale everything else. And I think there are, but some of them are always going to be outmoded by cards as powerful as the Great Henge.
Right. Yeah, so I don't know. That was kind of my experimentation, but like you go Jasper Sentinel into Kinnan, into like Innkeeper or Magda or whatever, it's like you're off to the races. You're so far
just
ahead.
Going off for sure.
You just need something to do with that mana, and obviously the dragons fill that role well, and then you just want something to refill your hand a little bit, some good way to spend your mana. And I think if people crack that code, it's like, well, you don't really need Edgewall Innkeeper anymore. Like that's kind of old hat compared to this engine, I think.
Mana explosiveness is worth a lot, and we've been through it a few times in this format. If you can consistently set up that engine that excited us from day one when we saw cards like Magda and Jesper Sentinel, there's something there for sure.
Can you believe that there are people that said Jasper Sentinel was not playable?
I can believe anything, Gerald. I think Magic card evaluation is very challenging. I strongly disagreed with anyone who said that, but I'm sure I've said some shit that doesn't really track whatsoever. And I probably say it on a regular basis, quite frankly. So I believe it.
So this wasn't like evaluating Magic cards, right? This was like a card already existed, and that colored the evaluation of the card, which is what I found funny about it. It's like the context is completely different.
Right. But also that card was good. Like maybe
Yes.
not good. It was acceptable. So if like that was acceptable, it was obviously way worse. And then the context is completely different. Why can this card not shine?
Yeah. And then we get things like Magda and Kinnan to make it just potentially very, very good. I mean, even like Clarion Spirit with Jasper Sentinel was awesome.
It didn't even use that stuff. It was just like, here's a Jasper Sentinel. Like, this is a good enough card. I don't even need to do these broken synergies. And it has more than held its own throughout its time in Standard.
And it just has reach, you know?
Good ability.
I don't know. Whatever. That card is completely reasonable, and you will see a lot of it in 22. It's in all the decks.
As it should be. I mean, any kind of 1-mana accelerant should always get our attention, unless it's, replaced by Birds of Paradise or something like that. I expect that trend to continue.
I'm playing both. Who cares?
Sure. Why not?
All right. One thing that I was playing in my deck that I just remembered was I had an Ox of Agonis that was quite good, but I kind of replaced that with Imrith. And then one of the other versions I had Corvold, but that was like more treasury. So I don't know how deep down that rabbit hole I want to go, but
interesting.
Corvold's like also, pretty fairly contained unless you have a bunch of treasures. So you'd have to go kind of deep on that, but maybe I'll revisit that. That seems fun to me.
Yeah, I might want to take a look at that for my Rakdos treasure stuff. Like you said, it's so easy to squeeze in a card like that. And you add a couple pathways, have your treasures, and you're basically ready to go.
So. Oh yeah. Corvold is super easy.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just have to work with that more.
Interesting.
I want you to work on the Kinnan stuff though, because I feel like you're a little bit better at the weirdo engine-y stuff than I am.
Well, I will go ahead and take a look at that. It's certainly on my to-do list. You bringing it back up excited me because basically that's where I spent like the first, 2 weeks of that format. And then you said what we found after that. What was it that got us? Showdown of the Skalds, where we were just like, yes, this is it. And then we started focusing on that card entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that tracks. But I am happy to go back to that engine. But before I do that, I have to tell you the other stuff I've been working on too.
All right.
There is more.
Hit me, but wait. There's more. Hit me with Bard class, because I think that card is cool and interesting. All the versions I've played against have been like these really kind of embarrassing Gruul legend decks that are trying to beat me down, but are playing just exclusively like pretty poor cards. So
yeah,
it has not worked.
So my Bard class deck is also not good, unfortunately. I hate to bring that up. I mean, I think it's a little bit smarter than that. I'll say that it's trying to do more stuff. The problem is that while Bard class is extremely strong, I think, and the payoff is absolutely there, it takes time. And this style of mid-range it's so much slower than something like a Rakdos Treasures deck that's trying to still do like a mid-range-ish type thing, or so much slower than anything that's based around Goldspan Dragon, because it's just like, here's my Magda and here's my Asika, and now I'll play a Kolvari, and like all these cards are good, even Questing Beasts, like all this stuff in conjunction with each other, it all sounds good. I think the discount that Bard class gives you is great. I think the late game it gives you with its card selection ability when you get it up to level 3, also extremely strong. But it just doesn't line up with the format right now. And maybe I have to look at ways to do this in like white and just go ahead and Elite Spellbinder and Drannith Magistrate and use that to get the time I need. But what I'm doing now is just like Valky, Magda, and obviously you get access to Tybalt as well. Going into Asika, which then goes Questing Beasts for Orcus, because this is a way to maximize your legends and still be active on the battlefield, control opposing battlefields. And I think this deck is fine if you're playing against like other creature decks. It's just not ever going to beat something like Sultai Ultimatum. Like, it's not even close, and there's nothing you can really do to fix the matchup. So that is why I have mostly stopped my experimentation with Bard class. If you can solve that problem for me, I'll come back to it, but I don't know the answer to that right now.
Fair enough. Don't mind me. I'm just over here adding Trail of Crumbs to my Corvold deck.
Well, that's cheating. Now you've activated its super mode, and it's not supposed to be that easy.
The messed up part of this is that, so I have 3 Corvolds already, right? Do I really want to craft the 4th one just to work on this thing when it's just going to be gone in like 3 months or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, it sees some historic play. I'm not sure anyone's ever gone as far as...
Not in a deck that I would ever play.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's ever gone as far as 4 Corvolds.
No, they have, though. That's like they have
they?
Yeah, they've played 4 before, but I'm not going to do that. Not when Brainstorm's legal.
Yeah, that's true. That's a post-brainstorm thing. Yeah, I mean, do you have any way to solve this problem? Do you have something to offer me with Bard class that you've tried that isn't just making like a good, solid mid-range deck, but one that does not match up with the format whatsoever?
No, I mean, you're going to have the same problem, right? You're like, oh, Bard class, level it. All right, I'll just drop my hand, right? All my cards are Frogmites now or whatever. And then you're just there with a bunch of things that don't refuel your hand. So like,
yeah,
you need some way to get around that. I don't know. Maybe it is just like the Great Henge, Vivian stuff, or like Ranger class, and you just try and snowball from there.
But you're still just not winning the game in time. Like that's the whole problem you come back to. And also
again, Sultai, yeah, obviously, but like you're gonna have that problem with everything, I think.
Yeah, the other problem with Bard class, like you talk about having your Frogmites everywhere. There's not a lot of good legends that actually use both red and green. Like I have a Clothis in my deck and I have a Corvold in my deck. And that's the only time I'm getting paid with both of those colors of mana.
Dude, Corvold. There we go. Maybe Corvold is the answer to all our problems.
Maybe it is, yeah, and that's fine. Maybe that's a good place to rebuild this deck around. But as it stands, like I said, I'm relying on Orcus, and then there's like Questing Beast and Asika and Magda and Valky, and none of this stuff gets the full discount. You're always getting a mana off, which is still very good, especially when these creatures are coming down larger than they would otherwise be due to Bard class. But it's very hard to like put your 2 mana into Bard class and get the immediate return on it. Only Clothis is really doing that.
Yeah. I don't know. People are playing like the red green 2/2 and Grum Gully and
you can't. I don't think you can do that.
Rada.
Those cards are too bad.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. And that was kind of how it played out in my experience. But like that's kind of the only way that you're actually going to get the discount.
That's how you get the max discount for sure. And that's why I think you're better off just like playing very heavy hitters where the 1 mana discount really matters. Like a 3 mana Orcus is extremely strong, as is the 3 mana Questing Beast. So you will take that. And if you get your 3 mana Corvold, then you're extremely far. But now that we're talking about that, I do actually want to go back and take a look with like a starting point of 4 Jaspera Sentinel, 4 Gilded Goose, and then go into leading up to Corvold, maybe even Trail of Crumbs to like have a little bit longer late game and see what that looks like.
I'm going to send you my deck right now.
Okay. I'm going to stop this podcast and go play it. I played it. I won all my games.
I just got Monkey's Paw, man. Okay, so this is 52 cards, and I only
Perfect
have
amount. 20
land at the moment with 2 Shatter Skull Smashing, so need to fill it out a little bit, you know?
Yeah, these are powerful Magic cards. A little Prosperous Innkeeper, Goldspan Dragon, and Corvold at the top end. Trail of Crumbs, sure. All this stuff looks good.
Trail helps you spend your mana, I guess.
You think you're winning games before Sultai kills you?
No, of course not.
Never under any circumstances.
Yeah, why do you keep asking me that?
I don't know, man. I mean, like this is the question I have asked myself over and over through this deck building. And the things like I'm actually excited about, I only get excited when I am beating Sultai. I think otherwise it's just a exercise in futility. It's very much a pull of the format. And if you're not beating it consistently, you can mostly discard your ideas.
All right, I know how to get you on board, but I also know that you're going to rally against it somewhat. Is I added 2 Orcus And I know that you're going to up that number to 4 for no discernible reason.
Sure, why not 4? I mean, you have all these small creatures. You got prosperous innkeepers, Magdas. Max it out.
I
Let's
also
just
have
go for it.
Corvold and Goldspan Dragon, man. My deck's
Yeah.
expensive.
It is expensive, but you've done a good job on the bottom end. Gilded Goose, Jesper Sentinel, Prosperous Innkeeper, Magda. I mean, that's you're producing a lot of mana with your creatures. I think you've done your homework, gotten to the place where you are getting paid on this stuff. So
yeah. I did a very, very cursory pass on Monk class. I did not come to any great conclusions. I think that it is powerful and it potentially facilitates the sort of deck that I would want to play, which is great. I just don't think the cards exist.
I think this card is incredible, and I think it's already incredible. It exceeded my expectations by such a dramatic degree. I was sort of blown away by it. And I know the type of deck you want to play. You also know the type of deck I want to play, and they're not the same thing.
No.
But if you are willing to play my type of deck, which is just boring, not flashy, azorious control is what I'm playing Monk class in. And it is so great there if you build your deck around maximizing it. I mean, you have to play some cheap spells. I think that's important to get your, second spell bonus basically every turn you want it. You also have to play some cheap instants because this is going to be your card advantage engine as you get to the late game. When you hit level 3 of this, if you're not familiar with Monk class level 3 abilities, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library for as long as it remains exiled. You may cast this card from exile as long as you've cast another spell this turn. So my first thought was like, well, I can't play a bunch of counter magic in my deck because it's just going to get exiled to Monk class. And I'm like, well, wait a second. What if I just turn it on my opponent's turn too? What if I find enough instants where I'm able to do that? And I don't think you really need that many. I have Opt, I have Behold the Multiverse. And with Behold the Multiverse's Foretell ability, you can get that at a discount a lot of the time. And you're just playing super long games. So you're not going to be constrained on mana. You'll get to that point of comfort where you're able to do this stuff. And you don't have to play it that turn. It just sits there in exile forever.
Right.
So this strategy has worked out really well for me. And the best thing about Monk class is that now you can clean up everything without playing stupid cards. You don't have to play Banishing Light, which is just like super inefficient and awkward. You just intend on getting things as they come together. You have your Jawari Disruptions to get your mana count up nice and high, so you're interacting early. At some point, you're going to have Saw It Coming online. But if something slips through and you're vulnerable, Monk class bounces any non-land permanent. So any of these problematic planeswalkers, a Tybalt, anything that would otherwise give you fits, you just clean it up with your Monk class. And then you get back to business, find a win condition. My win condition, I've got a few. I've got my 2 Imeriths. I've got 2 Grandmaster of Flowers, which, man, is that card so good in this deck. It just does the Icy Manipulator, Shatter the Sky thing so well. It used to be Icy Manipulator, Wrath of God.
Yeah.
Where you just force your opponent to keep extending into it, and then you sweep them, and they can never recover from that. I guess I technically have my 1 Monk of the Open Hand, which doesn't seem like it should matter, but it's been a 4/4 or a 5/5 for me a bunch of times, and just brick walling my opponent's attacks. I didn't really think it would play that role, but it does do that occasionally. And then I have 1 Hall of the Storm Giants, just kind of, I saw it as sort of free. I haven't actually had to use it. Imerith has been plenty, as has Grandmaster of Flowers. But this deck, I posted it over on my Twitter if you want to get a look at exactly what I'm playing. It outperformed all my expectations. And I think once I found Opt and was playing Opt to turn on Monk class whenever I wanted, that was sort of the key. And I'm excited about this deck, not only in the future, but I think it's good right now.
Yeah, I started with Opt. Brazen Borrower was the other card where I'm like, this is pretty nice together, right? Because Monk class already does like a tempo-y thing pretty well. And Brazen Borrower, gives you 2 spells, right? So you have like the first spell a lot of the time to enable the level 3 on it and stuff like that. And Loyal Warhound gives you some extra mana, which is nice. So I was like, well, maybe I can build like a tempo-y shell, and it's just like, it's not there, unfortunately.
No, I don't think it is. But that's where I started with Monk class too when I first saw it. I'm like, well, you can't do the counterspell thing. It's not going to work. And then I was like, well, actually, I'm not so sure about that. And then when you get to this late game where, Monk class is it's mana efficient for you because most of the time you just need to have 2 mana presented into your opponent's turn, and then you want to spend the rest of your mana. So you'll get points in the mid game where you're very happy popping off this monk class, turning it on, and then in multiples, this card scales so well, and it just allows you to take over games and play that long, never-ending game that I love to play. And it feels like I've found inevitability against the rest of the format, and also just good enough cards to keep up.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I'll have to take another look at your list and try it, but like I really wanted this whole thing to come together, and build a kind of Delver feeling deck, right? But I'm just like, oh wow, like Arcanist Owl or whatever. It's like, oh man, this is all pretty bad.
No, the creatures are not there for it yet. I mean, maybe at some point. It's very possible because I think just the card monk class is so good in and of itself that if you just get a little bit of the right support around it, I think there's a bunch of things you'll be able to build. But this is the best thing I've found thus far. I wanted to get your opinion on a weird card I chose to play in my sideboard. I don't know if this card's any good. I think this is like sort of 2012 deck building. But then I played it in a few games and I was like, oh, this is actually doing the job I really wanted it to do.
Dude, that's where I live, is in 2012. So hit me.
You would have hated this card in 2012 too. I am playing Yuan Ti Malazan. And I am sorry if I have pronounced that wrong or.
I know it's a blue card, right?
It is a blue card. It is 1 colorless, 1 blue, creature, snake rogue. It sounds like it should be a legend. It's not, though. Yuan Ti Malazan can't be blocked as long as it's attacking alone. Whenever Yuan Ti Malazan deals combat damage to a player, venture into the dungeon.
Oh, yeah, I hate it.
This is what I've been doing as like my current configuration is set up where you can do the thing where you sideboard out a bunch of your blue cards against control or against aggro, bring in more white cards, and then side out a bunch of your white cards against control and bring in more blue cards. So this is like my other blue cheap thing that I use to generate value in the early game while holding up counter magic on their key turns. And the plan has been good enough. It's been just fine. I mean, you do it with monk class to some extent too, where you just get it on the battlefield very early, and then you're able to keep up your mana in your key spots, like I mentioned before. But this card has been interesting, and I don't know. I mean, there's probably something more effective that you could do with the exact same role, but I wanted to try out some dungeon delving, and it actually has delivered on what I wanted thus far.
So I think that sort of plan is good in matchups that don't exist, but there are just so many decks out there where you're like, yeah, we're kind of like this control mirror match, right? But the control deck is like, is it dragons? And they're still going to keep in Bone Crusher against you because, like, why wouldn't they?
Right. Yeah.
So
it's not going to work there. I agree with you. This has been fine for me against Sultai, but against Is It Dragons, it's just going to get plunked over and over.
Against Sultai, though, if you just have a wall of counterspells and card drawing, I think you're okay. I don't think you need to be like venturing, because even like a lot of the venture stuff doesn't seem like it helps you all that much. Like, you're progressing towards something that helps you a lot.
Right.
But I would much rather just have, like, I don't know, frantic inventory. Just something crappy like that gives you more of a return.
So I've been going to the dungeon of the Mad Mage in this scenario, and I'm sure you know exactly what that means card for card. So I won't
gain a life, scry 1, either create a treasure, or a thing that's not relevant, scry 2.
No, the other thing's relevant. I can't believe you've gotten all these right so far, by the way.
But I'm literally looking at the card.
Oh, so you're cheating. Okay.
I don't know what any of the dungeons do, man. So this is the one where I was like, oh man, if there's like a dungeon control deck, that'd be tight, because the last one is draw 3, reveal them, you may cast one of them without paying its mana cost. Like, that's a good reward.
Right. I think a bunch of these payoffs are fine. I think like target creature can't attack until your next turn is actually good in some situations. I mean, not in the spot where you're bringing this in. You're just making a treasure token almost every time. And that's also very good. But the consistent scrying where you have very key cards you want against them and you always need to find more gas or find more control, I've been impressed with it.
I would rather have a cantrip. I would rather have frantic inventory when there's a rest in peace in play. then have a 2/1 that's like every third turn I get to scry or whatever.
You're a cantrip. I'm done with you. Get out of here.
You're a cantrip.
You're bad mouthing my snake rogue friend, and I won't stand for it.
Look, man, if it was like a raccoon or something, I'd be like, yeah, man, you do you, right?
I love snakes too. I just actually caught the first snake at my house the other day, and he was extremely angry.
Yep.
And usually, like the type of snakes you catch, they're almost always garter snakes around here, and usually they're pretty benign snakes. Like they don't really look to attack you; they'll just let you pick them up. This snake was out for blood. And respect. I mean, I kind of like interrupted his day. Obviously, I didn't hurt him. I picked him up very carefully. But he spent all of his time trying to bite me. And then in all my years, like handling these garter snakes, I've never had a snake do this. He went to constrict me. And like he went hard on my hand, like multiple fingers just being squeezed. And I'm like, this is impressive work, snake.
He did his best.
Yeah, I don't think like garters are typically constricting snakes, but I mean, this guy had some fight in him. He was ready to go.
He had to do something, man.
Well, I wasn't going to hurt him, obviously. I just kind of picked him up. I showed him my wife. She was like, get that snake away from me. And then I put him back in the grass.
He doesn't know that. Ooh, okay. So I just found some cards that I like with monk class.
Okay, hit me.
Of One Mind.
Yeah, that's a nice one.
Assuming that you have creatures and stuff. Like
you have a snake rogue in play, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. And then one that I hesitate to bring up because it flopped so bad, but I still think is good. Kasima.
Yeah, that was our number one card for that set, by the way.
Well, the entire set kind of sucked, so it's not our fault.
It was a bad choice still. But yes, it seems fine with monk class, or at least interesting with monk class.
Yeah, because I could see monk class with like some value creatures, and then you have like the Kasima vehicle serving up like the lands and stuff,
Yeah.
So you
monk
can keep
class
your stuff
clearing
going.
The way, sure.
Yeah.
All sounds good.
It sounds good. It's probably not good, but
No, I don't actually believe that card is capable of anything. I tried so many times, and is it seen any play in Standard 2022? Have you been against the Kasima yet in that format?
I have not. I don't think I've seen it cast.
Yeah,
but
I don't think it's going to be cast.
But it makes me think that maybe it should be cast.
Well, you try that. You report back to me.
I'm pretty sure all the blue cards are not good. Like Epiphany's good, right? But
right.
Everything else is kind of like whatever.
Yeah, there's these other Fertel cards. I think the Fertel cards are good. Behold the Multiverse Saw It Coming will probably remain good for quite some time.
Yeah, I guess Imrith is a card too.
Imrith, yep.
Now I'm looking at all the blue-white cards. I think I remember looking at all these and just being very underwhelmed.
I already found out the best ones. Just play my deck and you'll be all set. Don't worry about it.
I will. I'll give it at least one match.
Perfect. What else? Anything else you're building? Anything else you want to talk about here today as we detail the rest of our experiences with adventures in the Forgotten Realms?
I don't know, man. Monk class and Bard class look fun, but obviously there are significant constraints on the format, And
okay, that transitions really well to my next point. If you don't have more to say, but go ahead, please.
So like monk class needs very specific cards to exist, and that's really tough to do for like 22 in smaller formats, and especially it's like a blue and white card that demands that you have like good mana early on, and the mana is very shaky and stuff like that. So there's a lot of issues, but I don't know. It could be a card that's like good a little bit further down the line.
We will see. And you again alluded to the point I wanted to make, a mini rant that I'm going to drop.
Hit me.
How is it we go through this entire standard format, and we've just been doing this for what feels like so long now, and we were never able to successfully play 2-color aggro decks for the most part. I mean, like there's like some exceptions. There's a little bit of Boros here and there. Like if you had a Snarl and your deck was one of the very, very few that could benefit from actually having a Snarl, you might have gotten to dabble in 2-color aggro and gotten to be like tier 2.5 or something like that. But for the most part, we were just completely closed out. And the deck where I am just, I'm basically driven crazy at this point it's Selesnya counters. This deck has gotten so much support in every possible set and plays such powerful cards. I'm going to hit you with my list right now. This is what I built real quick.
Let's go.
4-star Pupil, a Snakeskin Veil, 4 Swarm Shambler, an Ozolith, 4 Stonecoil Serpent, 4 Ochre Jelly, 4 Primal Might, 4 Conclave Mentor, 2 Scavenging Ooze, 2 Ranger Class, 4 Ranger Class, 4 Luminarch Aspirant, and then we're a Lurrus deck somehow. Like all these ridiculous scaling threats, and we get to stay and be a Lurrus deck and have that late game combined with the late game of Ranger Class where we're 20... I don't know the exact number, 27, 28 creature deck. So we have these 2 really good persistent card advantage engines. We even have a mana sink and Lair of the Hydra, like a really good attacking land. And all this sounds so awesome. And these cards all so powerful. And you're like, this covers so many things. You beat down so well. You have this card advantage where you can legitimately grind out things like control. This has to be an awesome deck. And the reality is you just can't cast any of your freaking spells, and it's terrible. It's just horrible versus something like Mono Green, which doesn't have the same type of synergies, isn't anywhere near as exciting to me, but it's strictly better in almost every way because it can just cast its spells all the time. And it's so frustrating that never did we get paid on this deck. And when I read that deck list to you, we're covering basically every single set that's legal in Standard right now. Every set had something for this green-white tokens archetype. And for it not to be paid once throughout its existence, it sort of drives me a little crazy.
The mana stinks. And
Horrible.
It's like maybe you assemble green and white mana on turn 2, but it's often coming with a cost because it's like you have to Fable Passage for it or Temple or whatever. But like if you just play, like 10 of each basic and 4 pathways or something, then your mana is just heinous. So like maybe you get it on turn 2, right? But then it's like you end up with like 3 white and 1 green, and you're just like, yeah, you just like can't cast your spells, right? So it needs to be like the Boros deck that I'm playing right now is basically all white cards, and then you splash Showdown and Bone Crusher if you want it, And it's like, okay, that mana works. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, you have this. Are you playing Snarl as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the huge difference maker, right? Like access to that card only in the enemy colors is driving me bonkers right now.
Right. So the mana is a huge issue. And then, Bone Crusher Giant. It's like, you're like, oh, Conclave Mentor. They play Bone Crusher. They kill your thing. And they have a big blocker. And you're just like, I'm out of gas.
Yeah, this is why cards like Star Pupil and Swarm Shambler and the Ozolith and Ochre Jelly, like that stuff is like, okay, there's legitimate ways to play through this. Is it good? No. You certainly don't want to face Bone Crusher Giant with this type of setup, but you have some tools. And then, like I said, you're a Lurrus deck. So if you burn all their stuff and you get to a late game, you're able to rebuild in that fashion, or you're a Ranger class deck and you're able to do the same thing. So it feels like you are starting to find answers to that very, very real problem. At least passable answers, but it doesn't even matter because you can't cast these spells anyway. So who cares?
All right, I found this deck that I started working on too. I just sent this to you on Discord.
Okay, I'm looking at it now.
You can tell that I only started working on it because it has 24 basic lands in it.
Yeah, and only 54 cards. Those are both very good indicators that you may not have completed the deck, but this looks cool. Looks like you're doing a little Bant stuff here.
Yeah, so
adventures-ish with Monk class.
I was like Jasper Sentinel, Lotus Cobra, making the mana for Monk class. The adventures are good with it, but again, Monk class has the same problem with Jasper Sentinel,
right? Where
it's 2 pips far outside of the green stuff. So casting it and activating it is a little bit awkward, but I think that this could be a thing, right? Like you just play Monk class in Bant.
That looks reasonable. Maybe these decks are just supposed to play Jasper Sentinel, but that, I don't know. That doesn't strike me as correct. I don't know why. I just wanted to play like threat. But
yeah. Anyway, back to green white, dude. I agree with you. Like every time that there's a set and it releases like a counters matter card, it's like, okay, well, is this the time? Especially we're not that far removed from like Winding Constrictor stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people clearly love that stuff. And people have fond memories of Winding Constrictor. Like Todd Anderson has probably written articles about counter stuff several times in the last couple of years, and it's just like, oh yeah, this still doesn't work. My bad. So
Yeah.
It's just such a feel bad when you like get people hyped up and then it's not even close to paying off.
I think it's fine for a period. I would be completely fine if for most of Standard, this was not a viable strategy, even with all these cards out there, because you're teasing towards something. It's like, eventually we're going to get to do this. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. But to never deliver on it, that's tough. That's a tough pill to swallow, given how, I don't know, this deck just looks exciting to me. I think it does a bunch of really cool stuff. And it's powerful, it's fun, and I am sad I will never get to play with it.
Yeah, I think you just get to a point, with Throne where it's such a feel bad with all the ripple effects that it had, right? It's like 3 waves of bannings or something, and then it's still just like, well, you can't play, 2 mana 2/2s with good abilities because you just get Bone Crusher. And it's just like, well, are we going to ban stuff again? Nah, let's just not. Let's just ride it out. And I think that's fine. Whatever, who cares? But
maybe the correct thing would have been to allow just Selesnya counters to play once upon a time. And then we could have fixed our mana, could have went into our deck, found our Conclave Mentor in the late game, and it all would have been okay.
You still get crushed. You can't fix that problem.
Fine. Now not only are my creatures crushed, my dreams are crushed.
Yeah.
And I will go be sad.
No, I'm right there with you, man. It stinks to, get people's expectations up and then not meet them, right? Like if you are going to do this, you should probably try and pay it off. Unless, their whole plan was like, well, people like this counter stuff. Like, let's keep dropping like a card in the set here and there. But like, you got to expect that, then people are going to want there to be a deck for it in Standard, right?
Yeah. It's weird because like all this stuff on its own has done something for the most part. I mean, like Star Pupil hasn't really, and Conclave Mentor obviously needs the synergy to come together. Ochre Jelly is a new card, probably not very good outside of this particular shell. But everything else has had its moment for sure, just not together.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, when Conclave Mentor shows up in Modern in busted combo decks, and I've seen the Jelly, like people have played that in various decks. I don't think it's like particularly good or anything, but they've tried it. Like clearly they like the idea of that effect.
Yeah, I do too. I would agree with that.
So it is overall kind of disappointing, but I also get that it's difficult to design cards in this world where you've just been burned like nonstop for a year or two. And it's just like, do we really want to push power level and make a bunch of risks? And especially, I don't know, for a card like Ochre Jelly or whatever, where if it is one of the best things to be doing, if it is really pushed, then that's like kind of frustrating to play against. So
yeah, well, it's a good time for a little bit of safety. And I think that's being reflected with like my enjoyment of this set. There's clearly nothing that's pushing towards problematic, but I am having a good time building these decks. I'm having a good time playing the games for the most part. So you can put this down as a small complaint, my rant against the absence of Selesnya counters. I think on the whole, I am happy with the way this set has turned out. I almost hesitate to do this, but okay, here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to give my answer to the question, and then I'm not speaking again for the rest of the podcast. So basically, you have no choice but to address this.
I want to say one thing real quick.
Please do.
Looking at results for Standard, like full Standard, not 22.
Yeah,
it is mostly the same decks that exist, right? Yes. Maybe they look a little different. There are definitely decks playing new cards, whatever. But the things that we just talked about, where it's like Orcus, a couple different class cards, those are the best cards, I think, to invest at least some of the power level in the set in, because it gets you to do something different. And explore different options. And again, maybe we're just stuck. Maybe like nothing that you could put in the set would like make a new archetype or whatever. But like, those are the things that people are excited to build around. I think that that's what makes a standard format fun, is when like there are new archetypes popping up, right? Not necessarily just like, all right, we're playing the same decks and like every deck got a new card or whatever. Like it basically just feels like a lot of the same. And I think that that's really sad, but like that's been kind of the problem of like the last few sets where, you know, Strixhaven was pretty weak, but like this set isn't particularly weak.
No,
but
I don't think it is anymore.
Yeah, but it's not having the impact that you would like it to have, where it actually shakes things up and moves things. And I would like to see more of that going forward, where like you're investing however much power you think you can put into a set, invest a little bit more into kind of like the sideways stuff that actually has the potential to spawn off new archetypes.
Good take. Yeah, the polls are just too pronounced, too strong. You know, even at moments where Sultai Ultimatum's win percentage is not super high, the outsized effect it has on what is or is not viable in the metagame is almost impossible to overcome. So we were stuck any way you sliced it, I think. But that leads me to my closing sentiment. I would like you to give me, on a scale of 1 to 10, your final rating for Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms after hating this set for a very long time during preview season, although it was a short preview season, but I was low on it. I now think it's a good, solid set. I'm going to give it a 7, and I'm going to not speak for the rest of this podcast.
You realize that I'm about to ask you to clarify the scale and all of these things and be clear, but I guess if you're not responding and you're just gone already, I'll give it like a 6 or something. Just arbitrarily, without, I don't know, any sort of qualifier. Game.
Good luck.